one question that I have is in particular with respect to the welfare department, and I look forward to the day when we can call that something else. But in particular with respect to the welfare department, the social protection benefits that are delivered, I really want to understand how decisions are made at the level of the individual and the household. I know that there's a proxy means test that is applied, which is a questionnaire, an instrument that has been developed as a first assessment to say whether we believe that these individuals require this support. But Minister, you've made a very important point, which is that the business of social protection is a life cycle issue. And I may be fine today and need support. That's why it's called a safety net, to catch me before I drop on the ground. I may be fine today and I may need support tomorrow. And just as you told the story of your mother, who one day found that she needed support but was assessed because she had a TV and other goods, was assessed to not be needing it, how do we ensure that those people get that support? So there's the issue of the proxy means test and how carefully that is applied, but the more immediate question is the reality that people fall on and off access to social protection benefits. You're accessing a benefit one day, you call to follow up with your officer to ask, well, what is happening? And you're told, oh, that's not, you don't get that anymore. There is, from my understanding, when I cross-examine the situation, very little explanation. There's no transparency or clarity about how that decision was made in this circumstance. One gets the impression that it was made by one person deciding on one day what they were able to or wanted to do. And it may be a resource issue, but there has to be transparency. So the question is, one, how are decisions made on a day-to-day basis? I'm not talking about the first administration of the proxy means test, but why do people fall off and in and out of access to a particular benefit? That's one. And then the evaluation from the point of how we assess somebody to be graduated. We are talking very glibly, I dare say, Minister, you and I have had this conversation, about this notion of graduation. As if because you give someone a basic income, because that's what it is, a lot of our programs, they help, but they don't solve. Because you give someone a basic income and you've moved that person to work, that person is magically in a better position. And it applies at the level of the country. And the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, the Honourable Prime Minister, makes this point all the time, and this point must apply as well to the individual. Because how is it that a country like Barbados is deemed to be graduated, and we are middle to high income, and so that means that we never need support even when we have a hurricane? The same has to be applied to the level of the individual. And so you get access to a job and now you're graduated. And this notion that you can graduate somebody and you snap your finger and it's a miracle, it is a process. And we've seen examples where people that were meant to be graduated or that went into a program like the IC Bridge program that you had in the ministry that was supposed to graduate them are still experiencing the deprivations that we found them with. So this is an evaluation question, Minister. I'd be happy to hear from you and your officers.
Honourable Member, thank you so much for your question. You know, you and I share very similar opinions on a lot of these matters. As a development economist and as a social scientist, we've had these conversations, and so I am keen to hear the answer to your question. So I will ask the Chief Welfare Officer first to respond, and the Parliamentary Secretary thereafter, and the PS if she wishes to add as well.
Honourable Minister, before they proceed, I would want to say as well, very, very important question, and my ears are glued to the response as well. Thank you.
That's a very intimidating intervention, Mr. Chairman. You haven't said so all estimates.
Yes, hello again. No pressure, right? But let me first look at the process. We assess via, well, let me go back a little further. The National Assistance Act requires that all persons requesting welfare assistance must apply in writing and must undergo a socio-economic assessment. And that socio-economic assessment is done by a means testing. and we use across the ministry an instrument called Universal Intake Form. That form is very intrusive. It is meant to collect information on the individual themselves, the occupants of the household, to gauge family support, the health of the individuals in the household, can they work, are they disabled, the level of education in the household, so we can assess the skills and opportunity for training. When the officers complete the assessments, they would go to the senior welfare officers who would make the final decision. The client is then put on the register, whether it's for cash grant or food, and they go on with 2 dates, a review date and an inactivation date. And with all good intent, we hope to get to the clients at the time of the review before they can come off the system. The ratio of officer to client being 1 to 500, unfortunately, does not allow us to do that. So what we've been doing, and I would say we've been doing this for the past 2 years now, is rolling over clients, especially those with disabilities, women with children, well, children in general, so that they don't fall off the register. It is not our intention to unceremoniously dump anybody off the register. We have serious challenges, and it is to understand that it is a process that we must go through. I'm hoping that with the amalgamation, we can share this burden among our partners so that it is not just one entity that has to do all these assessments and slow down the process. I don't know if I've answered your question, but if you have a follow-up, I would be glad to address it.
Minister, before you come back, I'd let the Parset speak, and then I know you must have a follow-up, so I'll let the Parset speak, and then the PS, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you, Minister. I enter with the intentions of making it clear in relation to understanding my colleague's question and also concern. From the Adult Family Program is the angle I'd like to speak on, because I know a number of the colleagues reached out to me, having people dropped off unceremoniously, as they put it. And I'd like to first start by saying that it is ridiculous that persons are expecting assistance one day and the next day they're just not receiving it. From my experience, I can tell you there are a number of reasons for that. And sometimes it's basically because a lot of people are not tuned in to what's happening in the society. So for instance, with the Adult Family Program, I can tell you that there was a re-registration done, for example, last year, April, and the Household Mitigation Unit tried everything possible. They tried social media, they would have tried calling, emailing, WhatsApping. I think the only thing we didn't use was smoke signals. But at the end of the day, there were still about 1,000 people who still did not get the message. The only message they got was that the assistance has stopped when they realized they were not receiving it anymore. So I think in relation to creating platforms that we can communicate with the public more effectively, I think that's one of the things we need to look at. We talk about client ratios, and I can tell you that in the full analysis of the program, over 18,000 people sought to get on that particular program, whereas only about 9,000 would have met the criteria. It was also understood that about 4,000 of those 8,000 people would have received direct assistance, and about 8,000 would have received indirect assistance from the program. The other thing that we must understand is that because due to the criteria, things can change overnight. One of the things we recognize, and this point must be made, that every time we would have moved the curfew, a number of people went back to work or went back to full-time work. So they would no longer meet the criteria. But I do take the point that we've not done our best in relation to communication, and that was not anything intentional, but it just was not practical. So we have 5 people in the unit, and sometimes 3 of them will be out at any given time. And having 4,000 to 5,000 clients on, how do you communicate with 1,000 people, as you have to recognize that they have gone back to work through the NIS or the welfare, any of the other agencies that provide information to ensure that clients meet the criteria. One of the things I've asked for is, again, that using the technology platform website so persons can actually go and check their status. Those are the sort of things that we have to use in this society to our advantage, to be able to create platforms, to create a mechanism where we can communicate with our clients, our customers, our citizens, our constituents in a more real-time fashion. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister and colleagues. I'm not going to belabor the issue, but I did not really get an answer in terms of how decisions are made to remove someone from a particular benefit. I appreciate the response from Mr. Lane in the case of the Household Mitigation Unit. But the final point I will make before I move to my second question is that I believe that if someone is being removed from access to a benefit, that process of decision-making and how that decision was reached has to be made clear and communicated to that individual so that it does not seem as if it is an individual decision, as if it is an ad hoc decision. It has to be, well, when an individual reaches a certain level of income, when an individual is working for a certain number of hours a week, or the individual's household is accessing a certain level of income or another set of benefits, then that individual ceases to receive X or Y benefit. We have to treat people like human beings and communicate with them and not just say, this here ain't for you anymore. I move to my second question, Mr. Chair. It is related, and again, it comes to...
Can you hear me, Chair?
Sorry.
No, I find your point, Minister, to be so relevant, I wouldn't want you to move off of it, so without it being answered. And so I will try to perhaps get an answer for you. I do recall when I was Director of Social Policy, and we were evaluating the system. I don't know if the Chief Welfare Officer, if this has changed, but it used to be a point after 6 months, or there was a point where persons had to be reviewed. And if the person wasn't reviewed, then they would fall off the system. And at that time, this is before you were chief, but I don't know if it's changed, but at that time, then you'd have to go and manually put the person back on so that the person could continue to get a service. I know that there were cases where persons' circumstances would never improve, for people who were disabled in ways that would never allow them to be able to work, who also fell off, and then had to be manually, I think, almost put back onto the system. And at the time, the position that we took was that instead of having a city, considering your caseload, which makes it almost impossible, really, to be able to get around to these persons in time, for persons to stay on the system and only at the end of the review to then be taken off, as opposed to an automatic being taken off automatically, staying on automatically, and taken off if you're reviewed. I want to know if that is the same system. I suspect that's where the minister is asking, like, what happens that a person is taken off? Is that the same case where after a few months a person is evaluated or should be evaluated and could just drop off of a computer system as opposed to the review? I'm asking that for the chief so that the chief could answer you, Minister.
Yes, I appreciate receiving an answer. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Minister. I think maybe the point was missed earlier when I said that to prevent those people from falling off the register, especially persons with disabilities or persons with HIV or with children, we have been rolling over those people. We've rolled over those people now for the past 2 years. So we've completely ignored review dates, inactivation dates, and have just allowed them to roll over and continue to get the assistance. Sometimes there are anomalies and somebody may fall off, and then we would work diligently to try and get that person back on. But these clients falling off the system, as you're talking about, that should not be happening as frequently as before.